Our next speaker is Meredith McCarthy from Heal the Bay. And then we'll have a few minutes for questions, and then we'll have our first break.
Hi, everybody. My name is Meredith McCarthy. I'm the Senior Director of Community Connection at Heal the Bay. As I was thinking about, what I was going to talk to you all today about, um, it's basically 20 years of feelings and anecdotes, and it's so impressive to hear the research that's going on, and I realize that this every decision that happens in the city, every bit of change, starts with a master's thesis and a PhD student who's got an idea who seeds that change, and that change sort of trickles over into something like this, where a nonprofit or an NGO pulls that data, and then we run with it. And we, run to the electeds and we say, you have to make this change. I just heard this awesome thing, and you have to implement this right now. And that elected, is part of a funding measure. And that funding measure committee gets together and they said, oh, we're going to change the entire world by doing this one thing. And so this train of information kind of moves through, and suddenly it's policy. Suddenly your research policy, your research project is now the Bible by which that city council person is standing in front of the regional committee saying, this is how we have to give out points, right? And it gets so but that elected can only hold so many things at a time. And so when I was laughing when Isaac said, there's 7 massive things that now every policy, every funding measure has to hold in order to save the world, it gets very complicated. So I wanted to start with sort of reframe how we think about water resilience in Los Angeles. And, we tend to, follow the funding. And the funding, it's easier to fund big siloed projects, as you've already heard today. But if we go down a little history lesson, and I think my 20 years at Heal the Bay has sort of given me some perspective, that my first campaign at Heal the Bay was Measure O. Raise your hand if you remember Measure O, right? 3 of you. And so this was the first stab at community having input on a big funding mechanism. It was a $500 million funding measure from the city of Los Angeles. And this was the first crack that community, non-government, would have an opportunity to have their input heard in terms of a project that was going to shape, how we clean up our rivers, how we were going to clean up, the beach that we went on to it. And at the time, Mark Gold was my boss, and he was, we got the thing passed. It was unprecedented. $500 million was more money than, I'd ever imagined being able to pull together for stormwater cleanup. And Mark was on the community outreach committee, I think it was, or community outreach group. It was called the COG. And every day he would come back and he would say, he'd come back from these meetings and he's like, people have the scale wrong. The scale is wrong. We have to maximize every dollar. And the only thing we can do is big projects, right? So we had the zoo parking lot, which was a big project. Echo Park was a big project. But there were hundreds of applications in this small scale. And, I think when we, have to think about scale a lot. And he's like, these are not beautification projects. Propo is not about beautification. Again, this was 20 years ago, right? So scale is important. And, we have these large regional projects, centralized projects, neighborhood, regional projects, and then these distributed micro projects, right? So that's the scales that which government is operating in. And I think what's interesting about this um, talk is that the scale of a project is dictated by who is funding it, how messy they want their world to be, and then who is going to operate and maintain it. And that is something that gets lost in so much of this. We want this to be implemented across the city. Um, but who operates and maintain it, they have to carry literally the water on these projects. And so things get really complicated. And that's where we start to wobble. Um, and so when I think about, Prop O passed, we got to these big projects. Prop 84 then passed in 2006. And this was big money, right? This was big state money that was going to make really cool projects. And that money trickled down into conservancies, into funding programs. But we have learned from Prop O and that the community input was really important. And suddenly in Prop O projects, we had this, really exciting language equity. Like, wait, what? Everybody gets to be a part of this? This is cool. Nature-based solutions, like we can clean up the water a lot of different ways. We can just stick a big gray vault in the ground and that's cleaning up water and we're successful. But what about multi-benefit? And I was like, wait, what? Wait, I'm a water person or I'm a parks person, and who's that over there in that silo? And Prop 84 and the funding of Prop 84 started these conversations of like, wow, maybe I should walk across the hall and meet that person. And suddenly cities had ecologists. Suddenly anybody in public works was talking to the person, the arborist, the city arborist, like who let them out of that closet? And so that was big. And the whole world kind of started to pivot a little bit. That was the time. However, getting a Prop 84 grant was wildly complicated. In getting a state grant or state parks grant, very complicated. So we, Heal the Bay, thought, well, let's talk about, we can clean up the water using this kind of Prop 84 thinking. We can also clean up, if we clean up the neighborhood, if we improve the health of the neighborhood, we will get to clean water. So let's start with the neighborhood, but trying to get a community-based organization in an under-resourced neighborhood to be able to apply to a grant like a Prop 84 grant was so complicated. So healthy neighborhoods, healthy environment, we got Coastal Conservancy funding and we worked with 8 groups over the course of a couple years. Could we build capacity to get a hold of this money? And it was a really amazing process of like, let community need design these projects. And Mark kept saying like, oh, you're in beautification land. And I was like, just kind of, let's go with this. So we applied for a Prop 84 grant with one of our partners that we had been working with for a year. And I got $1 million from state parks to build a project that was completely community led. They needed a park. They wanted open space. They wanted green. And I could slide in a stormwater BMP underneath this project. Nobody would know. So, because I wasn't getting points for that from my state parks grant, it was just about urban greening. But I knew that what was Heal the Bay doing in South LA building a park? That's when I learned things like urban or liquefaction. Like, oh, guess what? Your stormwater project is not going to work in this entire ecotype, right? Because of liquefaction. So I just used that word for the first time, actually. I'm going to try to use it right going forward. But that's so at the same time, and a moment for Melanie Winter, who we lost this year. Melanie started a program called Water LA, and Heal the Bay was trying to shape that program. And it was all about urban acupuncture. And she had 185 distributed homes that were using a suite of BMPs that could actually change the neighborhood? Can we get out of this Prop 84 business and move into distributed land? And she got 185 families to say, yeah, I'll tear out my front yard. I'll rip out my parkway. I'll put in a rain garden. And at the time, the agencies were like, uh, no, just no. It was every day was walking uphill, both ways to school uphill. And it was brutal. And she slogged through it. And she was like the heretic, like, no, 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 we do big project, like infrastructure. The county has to control this. Somebody has to control this. Um, so she's fighting up this hill. In the meantime, we got Measure W passed. And Measure W was a safe, clean water program, which was finally this moment where community needs got the points, that it was about people, it was about what the neighborhood needed. And it was very exciting. And Heal the Bay, I have met two of the watershed coordinators here from that program, that there was somebody who was air traffic controlling change in this neighborhood, in this entire watershed, that knew the watershed very, very well. And so Nancy and Stephanie are here from Heal the Bay, and there's the Central Santa Monica Bay and the South Santa Monica Bay coordinators. So now we can connect people. We're going neighborhood by neighborhood. We're getting all of this great information like, yes, apply for this money. This is the program for you, the people. And it was, $300 million ish. And so it, was very exciting. It's going to go on forever. We get groups, we get them very excited. The group then gets a TRP. They get actual professional landscape architects and engineers to help them really shape this project. As long, and so then it goes to get funded. So this funding, this panel now gets to decide like, oh, you get points. This is all your good, beautiful, hard work. But in order to get points to make wet water, and by wet water, I mean actual drinking water, actually getting this water to a drinking water aquifer, there's only a few places in the entire county where that actually works. But there's not really a distinction between healthy soils and groundwater augmentation, right? So this is a big nuance that is lost on a lot of groups. So it is, if you don't have a letter from the water master saying, yes, my project gets water to groundwater, then you're not going to get those points, right? You have to, it's so competitive that to actually get to, funding, you have to have a cost benefit where it's very, very slow. I'm sorry, very, very, it's really tight. Every gallon per money has to be high. So I am now starting to build my park, and I'm like, my park is going to be the poster child for what Safe Clean Water could do. The community, stormwater, multi-benefit, a park, a tree, no potable water. And so we're cruising along, and I get this, it dawns on me that my perfect park that was going to be the poster child for Safe Clean Water would never get Safe Clean Water funding in a million years. My half an acre foot for what ended up being $3 million is not going to get funded by this. And I was devastated because I was like, I have sold this safe, clean water. I begged people to vote for it because I thought this was going to be this connective tissue to this grant. So this was, this was a big moment of like, how do we look at this and get the community what it needs while still being so competitive? We're still losing out. The community-based projects are still losing out to big, city infrastructure. It all has to happen, but how do we make that happen? And I guess ultimately, I've abandoned my talk, but my big ask is for you all, as I'm here, is that maybe I can salvage this. This idea of beautification. LA has a long history of beautification, and I always beautifications in quotes. We used to call it beautification. Now it's really important that we talk about it in terms of being strategic resilience tools, that we talk about it as distributed, equity-centered, scalable, and integrated into the planning. This is and Isabel's here. All of these groups have been in this business for years. And it's important that you go back and you look at Water LA's 2018 paper on that victory, which was this first go at a big scale 200, 180 home, how much water was it? How much water did they save? How much did they cool down that neighborhood? And this was a powerful, powerful moment. And I think it did not get enough acknowledgement when it came out back in 2018. Melanie's, the average Water LA Parkway retrofit was $470 compared to a massive green screen. So there's lessons to be learned in this, and I hope we can go backwards into this. There are so many benefits to these small scale interventions that they really can't go understated, but it's understudied, right? And that's why I'm looking at all you big brains out there. We have to sort of start to connect some of these dots. And when we do connect the dots, and you are doing these really amazing studies, but that information has to get to the scoring committee. How do we get the information that you are generating about this scale of projects, about this specific soil, to the people that will control if this project gets made? So I'm here today to very specifically ask you, after you finish your papers and your studies, is to make a round. And we don't have to call it advocacy, because I know that makes everybody lose their minds. You're not advocating, right? But you're educating. And we need people to, we need the scoring committees. We need the staffs at the council levels, at the supervisor levels. We need the staff who then turn this into policy to understand your victories, to understand what you have learned. And we need, we need to not reinvent wheels, of course. We need to embed this idea, this distributed scale into these policies. We need to update. We need you all to support the update of the Safe Clean Water Program, the evolution of the Safe Clean Water Program, because that's the funder in the House right now. That's what's building projects right now, is the Safe Clean Water Program countywide. So we need you to talk to your watershed coordinators. If the watershed coordinators, of which the entire county has one, if the watershed coordinator knows what you're working on, they can hold that. They can share it amongst themselves. The watershed coordinators get together monthly. Making sure that they understand your science is key to getting your science implemented into these projects, is key to getting this information back to the WASC, the WAGU, the entities that are allowing this money to move through. So you have to help us get this information to them. And I think that I will leave you with one with thought, is that the my last thought, sorry. I had it. I got so excited, I lost my place, sorry. So if we can reframe beautification and use it lovingly, and not as oh, that's a nice beautification project. And for most people, it's like, oh, you're planting rose bushes. That's so great. It's not going to help anything anywhere, right? But with a little education and a little stormwater, and your watershed coordinators are all ready to help you, do some of that education, some of that lifting, we can meet local community needs, but also advance Los Angeles County sustainability goals. Remember, we're not operating in a vacuum. And when you can nest these into the county sustainability goals and the city sustainability goals, everybody wins. So thank you.